Okay, I think we'll get started. There's still a couple of people that we were expecting, but hopefully they will log in and join when they're ready. So, bonjour, bienvenue, and welcome. I'm Jacques Amelard. I'd like to spend 45 minutes with you showing you some of the things that we've just introduced in SUPERText 704, which we'll be rolling out shortly. And I prepared a little slideshow to start things off, and then we'll get right into the software. One of the things I want to mention is with the 704, you will receive a completely updated release notes, revision J. I may refer to it on and off during today's webinar, but we have taken a lot of time to document everything that's new in SUPERText 7, right up to 704. So we hope that that will be a good resource for our users. One of the things we'll see this morning is more user control in the Select Indexes dialog, a minor improvement that some of our user base has asked for. For SUPERText Server, we're going to see some changes that we've incorporated in the management of INI files to make administering your server easier, and also to enable us to add some of the features that you'll be seeing this morning that are new in 704. You're going to see enhancements in forms. You're going to see the introduction of, in 704, of project versus common lookups. Things like names and monikers and key lookups can now be shared across projects, or it can be specific to a particular project. You'll also see the ability in the form designer to lock certain items. You're going to see other improvements that we put into the form designer, including alignment tools, improved handling of dates and numerics, total control over a tab order. You're going to see this morning a couple of small defaults that should assist some of our users that are routinely making tables of contents. You will see slight enhancements in date and a new way to insert a logged-in username in various forms. You're going to see the introduction in 704 of further sizing and positioning controls in some further windows. We've made some improvements in a feature that's been around in SUPERText for a long time, but hopefully it hasn't been used very much by our users, but hopefully with this introduction you will find ways that you can immediately put this feature to use, and it's the idea of document and folder grouping. You're going to see a new table tool called that enables you to find duplicates and gaps. This is a quality control tool. You're going to see a rebuild from search documents window. I think that's a fairly exciting feature that should help your users. You're going to see improvements in the SUPERText index module, in various improvements, including improvements in logging of IJF index job file processing. 704 introduces many new elements in the interface in French, en français. Avec la version 704, on a beaucoup des éléments de l'interface en français. Basic Pack 704 we'll briefly discuss as well. And we'll finish today's session with by showing you the new SUPERText Activation Manager, which is a new way to activate your product instead of the dongle for some users that are in environments that don't easily work with the previous dongle mechanism that we had. So that's what we're going to cover, and let's start taking a look. So I'm going to finish the slideshow. And let me just take a quick look here, see if the others, yeah, looks like we've had a few others join us, so good morning, bonjour, and hopefully the rest will join us in a little while. So let's jump into the first topic, more control over the Select Indexes dialog. Now this is specifically for SUPERText Server, so Workstation hasn't changed in this regard, Workstation versions of SUPERText. If I'm in an environment where I have published one or more indexes to my users, The only difference you will see in this improvement is the ability to add indexes. So the users can be given this ability. You can also disable it. And this is just a temporary addition of the indexes. So if you're in an environment where you publish indexes to your SUPERText server users, this will enable them to add an index, but just for the current session. On the other hand, if you're in an environment or choose to use an environment where there's no published indexes in SUPERText server, there is now the ability right from this dialog to add indexes and to remove indexes. And both of these in a no published indexes environment are permanent for this user. There's also a few right-click options available in this dialog now, including the ability to check all indexes. So if you have a very large index list and you want to perform a search across all of them, you can right-click and check them all. The SUPERText permissions can also be used, SUPERText passwords can also be used to control these features. So let me go into a SUPERText password environment. So in this environment, I can, for SUPERText passwords, you'll see these add index references, remove indexes references. So depending on the role that is logged in, you can enable these or disable them. So these are all documented, as I say, in the new version of the release notes. And I'd like to move on to the next topic. In SUPERText Server, traditionally what we did is we kept a couple of ini files. And there were two specifically. One of them was called streprt3.ini, and the other one was SUPRtext.ini, supertext.ini. The streprt3.ini file is no longer used by SUPERText Server. There was a few settings in that ini file. We have moved them to the _startup.st. So, for example, if I take a look, a couple of the settings were folder grouping field for your environment and document grouping field. We'll discuss these in a minute. But these settings used to be in an ini file. They are now in the _startup. Secondly, the SUPRText.ini file is now in each user's profile. It's no longer a pre-installed in Windows. And the reason for this is twofold. First of all, let me see if I can find an example of this. I think it is here. So what would happen in a server environment is Windows would virtualize access to ini files. So even though SUPERText.ini was installed in the Windows folder, any changes that users made would get stored in the virtual store somewhere. So in this case, because I'm not really on a server operating system, but it works the same, you'll see that Windows keeps a virtual store of this ini file. Well, that causes a lot of problems because, first of all, Windows does not do this properly. Some changes are virtualized and some are not. So you could have a mix of readings from one ini file and from the virtual store. And secondly, it's often very mysterious where the ini file that SUPERText is using is. So what we've done now is we have put supertext.ini in each user's profile. So when you upgrade to 704, if that ini file doesn't exist in the profile, Supertext will create it. But it now means that you know exactly, and Supertext knows, which ini file to use. Now you know that supertext.ini, its main purpose is to keep a list of indexes that Supertext index uses, and if you're in a non-publish only indexes environment, that your available indexes list will show. So with this change, we've introduced something else. In version 704, Supertext index module can now also get a startup parameter. Let me show it to you, which is a /p equals, which advises Supertext index what profile or where to look for supertext.ini for the index list. So when I start this index module, the indexes list that it comes up with will come from the supertext.ini in a profile that we asked for or that we specified. So this, I think, will avoid a lot of confusion and will let you better control both your users, your regular users, and the users of Supertext index module. Now let's take a look at some form enhancements. By the way, let me open up the release notes, because a lot of the stuff that I'll be discussing are in the release notes, and from time to time I'll refer to it, but we encourage you to look at these when you get them. So we've introduced the idea of project versus global lookups. Let's take a look at that. So I will do a search. And let's open this up. Let's open up the form. So in the Notes tab, I have monikers and names linked to this Notes field. Now the monikers in this particular example was specified in this form as a common list, which means that even though the same form is used in numerous projects, they will always share the same list of monikers. Contrast that with with names. The names list in this field was introduced or defined in the form as project specific, which means that the same form is used in multiple projects, but it will automatically open the names list of the currently selected project. And we select that in SuperText 7 here. At any time, the default location of lookup files is selected by the user. So at this particular point, Acme 2015 is the project that I've selected, which means that the form that I will use, if it defines a project-based key lookup or a project-based project-based name list or a project-based monikers list, it will look for it in this particular location. On the other hand, if it's a common one, it will ignore the location that I'm logged into right now. It will ignore the default location I have set, and it will use the common list in the location specified when I designed the form. And the same thing works with lookups as well, with key lookups. So for example, the witness key lookup is defined as project-based in this particular case. So the list that I get when I go to edit this lookup will be different depending on which project I'm logged into. But on the other hand, the classification lookup is common. Now, we just put common to all projects here just so that, you know, we demonstrate that today, but that wouldn't be in your real project unless you wanted it, of course. So that is, as I say, documented starting over here in the newest version of the release notes. Now, you may have noticed that we've improved the names and monikers windows. They're bigger and they default better. Anyway, you'll see those improvements as you use them. Another interesting thing in SUPERText 704 is that you can now lock in your form names list, monikers list, and drop-downs. So let's take a look. For example, when I go to access the common monikers list, if I attempt to add an item to this list, I get this message. Your SUPERText administrator has locked this list. So this enables me to create common lookups or common lists and make sure that users don't change them. And this is at the form level. It's not in the SUPERText passwords level. On the other hand, the names list associated with this can be added to by the user, assuming that you have not denied them that permission in the SUPERText passwords. And the same thing applies to drop-downs. So relevance, we wanted users to pick only one of these, so that list is locked. On the other hand, in this particular example, the type drop-down is not locked, so the user can actually add to it. So you can mix and match which lists will be common, which will be project, and which objects in a form designer, i.e. which drop-downs and which names list or monikers list will be locked and which won't. So let's take a look how we do that. Let me switch over to the form designer for a moment, and let's take a look at the form that we're using. My default form is this one. And we saw, by the way, many changes to the form designer you'll see in 704. One of them is you can double-click on an object in the preview window to open up its properties. So you'll see that the names list that I've linked to notes has been specified as always use table found in default location of lookup files, which means it's a project-based lookup table. On the other hand, the monikers list is defined as always use table exactly where it is, which means it's a common table. It's a common list. And similarly, I can lock any list. I've locked this particular list, a common one, so you'll recall when we tried to go add a moniker in this form, we got a message that the list was locked. On the other hand, when we tried to add a name, we were able to do it because the list is not locked. Now, if a list is locked, then the only way to edit that list is from the form designer. I'd have to edit it right here. And by the way, I get this message. This list was created in an older version of SUPERText. Do we wish to increase its size? We've widened the list so they can accommodate more text in 704, so you can increase their size. But this is how we would edit this particular list. Even though it's locked, we would do it from the form designer. And same thing with, as we saw from the locked drop-down over here, the only way to edit that list would be in the form designer because I don't want users, when they're using the form, to be able to add or change that list. So that's where that's implemented. While we're here, we've added about eight or so alignment tools to make your life easier in the form designer right here in the preview window. So when you add objects or you want to move them around, you simply select them and you can pick one of these. For example, align right. You'll see it align the right edges of the two objects. And we have an infinite undo level. I can undo that change with the undo. We also have sizing options. I'm going to multi-select some 3 fields, and I'm going to say size them to the shortest. And you'll see that the description got shortened, so they're all the same size, but to the shortest. And I can undo that. Also in 704, let's talk a little bit about tab order. Let me demonstrate something to you. Let me go back, and I'm going to pick a form that was done previous to 704, this form. And I'll go to this field, and I'm going to use my tab key, because if I'm a serious keyboarder, I will use tab to move around. Now you'll see it goes to the date 1 field, it goes to the, oh, why did it go to date 2 field? I really wanted it to go down to the 2 witness fields. Because previous to 704, SUPERText decided the tab order. SUPERText decided what to do when the user clicks the tab key. And, you know, most of the time that worked really well. But in forms that have vertical sections or columns, like this particular form, it didn't work that well. So let me show you a form, my default form, that was done in 704. So if I do the same thing now and I tab over, you'll see I go down to the date 1 field. And when I tab next, it's going to move down that column, then to the other side, down that column, and then to the last field. So how do we do that? Well, in SUPERText 704, in the Form Designer, we give you total control over tab order. Let me show you. I'm going to make a copy of a form. Let's take the form that didn't have tab order. Let's copy it. I'm just going to call it delete me so I can get rid of it when I'm done. And let's edit delete me. So what I want to do is I want to impose a tab order in this page, for example. So I click Set Tab Order. And SUPERText says, click on each field in the current page in the order you wish for tab order, and then click Exit Tab Order. So we're ready to go. So watch what happens. I'm going to click on this field. I want it to next go to this field. And you'll see as I'm clicking on the fields, on this side, it's assigning a tab order. This field, this field, this field next, that field next, that field next, and then that field next. Now I'm done. Now if I want to set tab order on the other pages of my form, I can, but that operation has to be done page by page. I click Save. And now I'll open up the Delete Me form to show you that that form now behaves the way I want it. So I'm just tabbing through in the order that I wanted, or Shift Tab to go backwards. So if I'm a serious keyboarder, the new ability to set tab order should help you. And let me just delete me. Now we've also improved the handling of dates and numeric fields. Now bear with me for 1 second over here. And let me do a search, a field search. So I'll use my field tool. I'm going to search type for check. There's a few checks. And let's open up a form. So we have a different form in my example associated with checks. So first of all, this is interesting. What SUPERText does now, if a field is defined as a standard SUPERText N8 date field, even though it's an N8 date, it'll show it to you in textual form. And if you configured your system in French, the way I'll show you in a few minutes in this morning session, that will come out in français. But if I want to edit this field, it then switches to the N8 date, so I can do my edit, change it if I wish, and then it gives me a nice English date. A little improvement. Well, look at this. This is interesting. If the field is blank, in previous versions of SUPERText, text fields that were blank were always shown as blank, but numeric fields, including date fields, that were blank were shown as 0. And this agitated people. Why were some blank and some 0? Does 0 mean that somebody entered a 0, or does it mean that it's a blank and nobody entered anything? Well, I guess those were valid questions. And, you know, if you complain enough, we kind of change it. So there were lots of complaints. So now we show these fields as blank. And trust me, even though it looks trivial, that actually was a lot of work to do that. So when I click on a field, I can put in a date. I'm lazy, so I'll just put in today's date, and it shows up as English or French, but in textual form. And if I want to change it, I do that. And then when I click on a numeric field, it highlights the whole field. So sometimes users were having trouble. They ran out of space because they put their cursor halfway into the field, or all sorts of interesting things that users can do. Now we highlight the whole field, so we just type in what we want. So you'll find that numeric and date fields in SUPERText are handled much better than before. Let's look at a few other miscellaneous enhancements in 7.04 before we get into some more serious stuff. And some of these things are small, but we've added them because users have said it would save them a lot of money. A lot of time, which is a lot of money, of course. Let's go to table of contents. If I go to make a new table of contents, I go to options. We've added 2 new defaults for you. So if you don't want this category to be called general documents, you don't have to change it every time anymore. Pas de classement. If I make this a default, then whenever I make a table of contents in the future, unless I change that default, that's my new option. It's pre-filled. And same thing with these options. So that's a quick little thing. You'll want to take advantage of that for your environment. We've also enhanced the insert date and time. You'll see you can customize the format, and it's a nicer format. And we've introduced a new one, insert logged in username. So if I search for something or something else, I think there's a better document here. And for example, I'm going to go and add some subjects. And my subject is not currently in my lookup, so I may want to add one. In the notes area, I've got 2 fields, added by, and you'll see there's a Control F8 is a shortcut key. So what we do now is we get the Control F8 will always type in the login account that you logged into your Windows session with. So in my case, it's a Jacques.Amillard. We also fixed the Control F5 and the other shortcuts. They do work now in all forms, including forms used with lookups. While we're here, I should remind you that key lookups in SUPERText 7 can have pictures in them. So that's right within the table, not in the. These are not external pictures. They're pictures right in the key lookup table, and they're easy to add. I can add a new picture anytime I want. Just click on the picture, and now I have a picture in my key lookup. And I can have multiple pictures. I can just keep doing that. So I just thought I would remind you about that in case you want to use that. That's documented in the manual as well. In order to use that feature, you have to one-time enable your key lookup to accommodate what we call attachments. A couple other small changes before we get into some of the bigger ones. The search window now has a set window position as default. So if I want my search windows to initially start here, I do that. Whenever a window opens, it'll start there. On the other hand, if I want them to start here, that's now one of the further windows. And of course, we've got dozens of them that already have this tool, but we have to add that one because you asked for it and we had missed it before. Similarly, another one we added it to is the SUPERText Media Player window. So if I'm doing work with wiretaps or videos, and I always want that window to open up over here, and maybe at this size, I can now set the position and size of this window as a default. The other thing you'll notice in SUPERText 7 is the media player window in SUPERText is no longer modal, which means that you can now easily do something like this. You can start making notes, while you interact back and forth with the media player. So 10.2, witness says blah, blah. Play some more. See, I can interact with it. In previous versions of SUPERText, that window was kind of, you couldn't do that if you had expanded one of your fields here to work with a bigger window. So anyway, that's the idea. So let me trash those changes and go back. By the way, when I searched for Joe Smith video, I found video-Joe Smith. Why? Well, also in SUPERText 7, I want to remind you that we've introduced what we call relaxed phrase searching. And you can read about that in the manual. But suffice it to say that it's going to find stuff now that previously, if you did a query like that, it found exactly what you said rather than what you hoped for. Now it tries to find what you hoped for rather than what you said. But if you really wanted to find what you say, you can make it behave like pre-7 by putting Joe Smith video in quotes, in which case it's going to find what you said rather than what you hoped for. I mentioned a little bit earlier that we've always had two system fields in SUPERText, one for folder grouping and one for document grouping. And I mentioned that those fields now, you can define which ones you want to use. You define them in your underscore startup.st, so you can read the manual about that. But what's the significance of that is now you can take advantage of existing fields in your collection to enable two types of searches that we've always had. So let me demonstrate them. I'm going to go to a different project that has that demonstration. This project over here. Of course, I'm using here some of the SUPERText the new pin tools that are available. So I don't have to go open a search window, log into the index. There's pins available for all these different tools to make recurring operations much more efficient, because now if I click on that, the window comes back with all the indexes that I want in this particular example. So those are documented as well. If I search for the word pump, I see that some of these have a little plus. Little plus means that this search result has a value in the field that your system has designated as a document grouping. That's the first level of grouping. And if it has a little plus, you can click on the plus, and then SUPERText will do a search that will automatically fetch all the other documents that have that same field with the same value in that field, and will show you where your document is in that group. Hence, this is 7 of 13 that share the same category value, because I defined in supertext.ini, I defined, let me see if I can find where I did that. Here we go. In the startup over here, I defined a field called category to be my document grouping field. So SUPERText says, fine, if that's what you want, then I will make available to you without any work on your part a new type of search that will automatically locate all records that have that same category value. So if I take a look why I'm hitting this, because category was assigned as evidentiary. Well, in this particular case, we also have the word pump. That's why we found that document to begin with. But if I open this one, for example, there is no pump, but it's part of the same category, and we asked it to open using this tool over here. Click on the plus, everything in that document grouping. So we've always had that. We've just enabled it to make it much easier to use for you. Similarly, we have a second level of grouping. We call it folder grouping. So these are ancient records back when Cantel used to exist, if any of you remember that. If I go to, for example, this one, and I right-click in the result, fetch documents in folder, in this window, I'll say in new window. It says, fine, I can do a pre-canned search for you. It'll get everything in the same folder. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is let me go back to my ini file, that the field that I defined as my folder grouping field, in this case it's a field called folder ref, what this search does for you automatically is it will take everything in the same folder ref. Oh, in this case it's checks 1996. So basically what that means is that all of these documents share the same value, checks 1996, in their folder reference field. So that when I located one document and I want to see its brothers and sisters, I right-click, fetch documents in folder, in new window, and SUPERText does that based on the value of the field we defined for that second level of grouping called folder ref. So one of the changes in 704 is that the grouping fields, document grouping and folder grouping, don't have to be numeric values anymore. They can be textual, as they were in the example I just showed you. Now let's go back to my 2015 project. There we go. I don't want to type. I'm going to load a few macros I created before, just so that I don't have to type too much. There we go. And now I can type really quickly. There you go. There's 194 of these documents, and I'm going to make a table. I'm going to call it gaps. So the idea is I have a table. I'm going to shift-click on refno to sort them by refno. Suppose I want to make sure that refno is sequential. I don't have two with the same refno. And I don't skip any refnos. Well, that was actually a pain in the butt in the past, but it turns out it was a recurring need for our users. So we added this new tool here, find duplicate or gap. You simply click it, and SUPERText says, what column do you want me to search? And by the way, it reminds you that the table must be sorted first by that column. That's why I shift-clicked on that column to sort it. And what do you want me to count by? Do the numbers go up? Are you expecting the numbers to go up by 1, by 5, by 10, by 0.1? So in my case, it's 1. So if I have these settings common all the time, I'll make that a default, so whenever this window comes up, they will come up in this way. I simply click OK, and SUPERText says, hey, I found a problem. I found a problem at record 193. I was expecting 100193, but I found 100195. But the sequence from 1 to 192 was OK. And I click OK, it takes me immediately to the problem. I can see what it is, and then I can rectify it. So that's the new tool called Find Duplicate or Gap. I think somebody must have just joined us a little bit late. If you did, good morning. Now, I'm going to search for something. And I don't know, let me go here, for example. And I'm reading this, and I want to add a note. No, not this one. Maybe this one. Oh, I must have pre-filled these. Let's say I want to add a note. Control N. That's just my macro. So this is relevant. I wanted to add a note, TPH affected drinking water, right? I save this. And now I search for this note. I can't find it. Well, we know why. SUPERText saves everything automatically, but this particular index hasn't been updated. Now, I don't want to update these indexes all the time, But from time to time, I may want to update it immediately. So we've introduced this feature over here called Rebuild Indexes right from the search window. And it's telling me that this particular index was last built yesterday at 12:27. And if you're in a French environment, that'll tell it to you in French. We'll see in a minute. So the user now can simply click over there and wait about 2 or 3 seconds, and it's done. And now, if the search is executed, it works because the index now has been updated automatically by SUPERText, last rebuilt today at 10:11. That's pretty cool. And if I have numerous indexes selected, and I click this tool, they will all be updated. Whatever I've got selected in this window. Furthermore, if an update takes a while, which it won't in this case because they're small, I can continue working in this window or in other windows while the update is running. And then when it's done, SUPERText will give me a notice. And if I log out of SUPERText in the meantime, well, that's okay too. Now this is all documented fairly well here, because I want to show you a couple of extra settings that you should be aware of. So here is the Rebuild Indexes directly from Search Documents window. Well, it turns out that just giving you this may need to be controlled a little bit. So here's how you can control it. There are some directives. By the way, this is available not just in SUPERText Server, but all versions of SUPERText. And there are directives that you can put in your underscore startup. Well, for example, you could say, I don't want to give this to my users at all. So you put the directive search index rebuild equals off. Now that button will not appear. Hopefully you don't do that. But you may want to control it a bit. So the one you likely will use will be this one. Search index rebuild equals, and then you'll give it, this list looks like 4 parameters, 1, 2, 3, 4, separated by bars. So the first parameter, PB by default, is what operation do you want SUPERText to perform when the user clicks that rebuild from the search window. So usually you want to purge and build the index, but you can pick one or the other or both. The second parameter is interesting. It's 2 over here, and it specifies the maximum number of concurrent rebuild jobs that the user may launch. So you see, if I didn't have a limit here, and the user opens up 20 search windows on 20 large indexes and sets to update all of them, all of a sudden I've got my my computer or my server running 20 threads of SUPERText index to update each of those indexes. It's not, that's not nice to the other users that may be using the computer. So you can limit that, and we recommend a setting of 1 or 2 in a busy server environment. So that if the user has 2 of these threads already running and for some reason the rebuild is taking a while, when they try to do it again, it'll say, hey, wait for the other ones to be done. The third parameter is what's the maximum number of indexes that can be in the window before we tell the user to go take a hike. So for example, I don't have many, but you have 400 projects. The user right-clicks and says, check them all, and then they have 400 in this list, and they say, update. And then SUPERText will say, well, okay, unless, and by the way, there is a default of 10 for this, but you can specify a different number. So in my case, if the default is 10 and the user selected 20 indexes and said rebuild, from that window, SUPERText would say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do all 20, open a window and tell me which one you're really interested in. And finally, the last parameter, in this example, 250,000, it's conceivable that I have an index that's called mother of all indexes, master of everything I've ever done in my whole life, and it contains, 40 million records. Well, a rebuild on that index may take an hour or 2, and I don't particularly want users to be able to do that. So I can specify over here what's the maximum size of the index before it's rejected for such a rebuild operation. So as I say, this is all documented over here, and I hope you find this feature fun and exciting. While we're here on index, I should point out that SUPERText index, as I mentioned, does use ini files now, so you can tell it when you load SUPERText index now, you should tell it, and if you don't, it'll behave like pre-704, but you should tell it where your profile is, or the profile you want to use, so it knows where to get your supertext.ini file in order to store the index list. Let's take a look at the module, and I will show you there's a couple of nice new things in here. First of all, when we create index job files, it's much easier to add indexing commands. For example, now we only list indexes once, and then we specify the details for that one, or double click on it. I want to do a build and a purge. Right, so they're much easier to select, and I can default my operations. And we have 3 new commands that greatly improve the log file that SUPERText index creates. And this is particularly important when you're running in a server environment, when you're running the SUPERText index module from a Windows scheduled task. So one of the options we have, for example, is don't create a log file at all. Log to no log. If I put that one in my script, this job will run, and a log file will never be created. But here's an interesting one. Log to relative parent. What this does, instead of putting all of the logs in one folder, which I can still do by using the log to specific folder command, I can tell it to put the logs under that particular project. So the relative parent means the project under which the index is stored. And maybe I want all the logs to be under IGF logs. If this folder doesn't exist, it will create it. And then you'll see this log2 command. It can be anywhere in my script. I'll just put it here so you can see it. Got easily scripted. So if I save this, and I call it webinar, and I run that, I want to show you something. Let me go over here to the project. So it should create a folder when I run that, either interactively here, or if I run it from the Windows Task Scheduler. You see it created this folder, IGF logs, and it logged it. And we changed the way we name the log files to make things much easier and much better now. It gives you the name of the index job file that ran it, and the date right down to the second. So anyway, that's all described for you on in the manual in the latest revision over here, and you can read up all about it when you get this. Now, SUPERText avec interface français. Alors, on a ajouté beaucoup de choses en français. Let's take a look. Alors, j'ai les menus en français dans les 2 fenêtres maintenant. Et les barres d'outils en français aussi, dans les 2 fenêtres. So how do I control this if I want French? Well, in the main underscore startup.st, again, this is in the manual, you add this. Language equals French. Avec la version 7.04, je peux avoir dans le même serveur des sessions en français, des SUPERText en français, et des sessions en anglais. So I can mix and match French and English on the same system now. So the way I do that is in the main startup.st, I define the default language, French or English. And if I want to change the default language for a particular profile, I do it in the _startup.st for that particular user. So here we have French, and let me go over here and mix. And Ernie startup.st contains a value to change a default. Language equals English. So although the default is French, Ernie has asked for English. So Ernie gets SUPERText in English, but this user gets SUPERText in French. Now, not only, pas seulement le menu et le barre d'outils, mais d'autres choses sont déjà en français. Par exemple, mise à jour aujourd'hui à 10h18, ou par exemple, les dates maintenant sont en français, 9 mai. If I click, I get that, but otherwise I get. So the version you get in many cases will be a French version instead of the English version if you've selected the French interface. That's new in 704. We've also corrected and improved the sorting of lists in SUPERText when you have accented characters, which was a problem in previous versions. In previous versions of SUPERText, par exemple, the way anything got sorted, in previous versions of SUPERText, téléphone avec E accent aigu was actually listed after TH because the previous versions of SUPERText treated the accented character higher in the sort. This has been corrected in version 704. You should find all sorting correct. Alors avec la version 704, tous les triages devraient être bons avec les accents. Alors par exemple, avant 704, si je fabriquais, je crois que j'ai donné un exemple ici, un toc par exemple, avant j'ai fabriqué ce toc avec le 703, je trouve que le triage n'est pas parfait. Par exemple, Agnew devrait être après Agné. Mais avant le 704, le E accent grave n'était pas trié comme il faut. Avec le 704, on a arrangé ça. Alors, si j'ouvre le même talk avec le 704, on voit que c'est trié comme il faut. For those you English speakers, you can ignore everything I just said. English only, I should say. Okay. SUPERText Basic Pack 704. There's a few changes we put in to handle project versus shared keylookups. But the other big change is SUPERText 704 Basic Pack includes SUPERText Basic 732. And 732 is the version that you need to run on Windows 10. We did have a special download previous to the release of 704 of SUPERText Basic 732 for Windows 10, but now in 704 it is integrated into Basic Pack so that the volumes you'll make now will work out of the box for Windows 10, and the auto run and all of those functions have also been modified for Windows 10. So SUPERText Basic Pack 704 will take care of you with Windows 10 disclosures. And finally, I'm a little bit over time, I'm sorry. I want to talk to you about the using SUPERText without a dongle. So we have a document that you will get called SUPERText Activation Manager. And it's only 8 pages. You can read over the long weekend if you want it in advance. Otherwise, wait for your SUPERText product. And beginning with SUPERText 704, you can configure SUPERText for use without a dongle. I want to point out that if you want to continue using the dongle, you can continue using dongle in 704 exactly like before, and indeed in future versions of SUPERText, we continue to support the dongle. But some people, for some reasons, may not want to use a dongle, so we have a different mechanism now called the SUPERText Activation Manager. And the Activation Manager is shipped now with every SUPERText 704 and later product. So let me show you what it looks like. We have it, for example, Basic Pack has the Activation Manager. Did I miss it? There it is over there, ST Activation Manager. And also, for example, Server has the Activation Manager. But no matter where you launch Activation Manager from, the Activation Manager will work with all the products currently installed on this particular computer. Now, it does require elevated privileges, so I'm going to grant it to him, to the Activation Manager. And let's take a look. So the Activation Manager is reporting that we have 2 SUPERText products installed on this computer, Basic and we have Server. And Basic Pack, its activation status is a hardware dongle. In other words, it's working like it always has with a dongle. Okay? On the other hand, I configure Server is working with an activation. And the activation for Server is okay. There is a serial number, and it's a no expiry activation. So what does this mean? What this means is that if you are on subscription support active, you can elect, vous avez le choix, you can trade in your dongle for an activation. So if you want, for example, on your server, you want it to run in activation mode so you don't have to worry about a dongle, you can do that. You can't have both. You can't keep the dongle and have the activation, obviously, but you can trade it in. And the way we manage that is really quite simply, you're going to go to your product. I'm going to go to Basic Pack, and you will say, I want activation. You're going to request an activation file. And as I say, this is all documented over here in a document called SUPERText Activation Manager. You're going to request an activation file, and SUPERText will compose this email. You can automatically send the email if you want via your browser, but usually you'll want to just cut and paste the text and maybe go to this machine or another machine and send the email. So let me show you what it looks like. And what SUPERText does, it sends us, you're going to send it to activation@supergravity.com. It sends us the details of what product you want to activate, and it sends us some parameters. These are machine parameters that encourage you to use SUPERText only on this machine after you activate it. What we do is if this is a new product that you've received without a dongle, then we send you back an activation file, and the activation file looks like this. It's just a file with your serial number and .vdg. And it's just one big number like that. So we send you back an activation file, and then SUPERText can then be used on this particular computer without a dongle. Now, if you have a dongle and you want to exchange it for activation, then when we send you back this file, it's good for 30 days. When you send us back the dongle, we send you a new file which has no expiry. So that if you ask for activation and never return the dongle, you have to go back to the dongle within 30 days because the activation will expire. You won't do that though, right? Right. When you receive the activation file, you simply install it by clicking Install Activation File. If you want to move your SUPERText license, you deactivate it from this computer, It sends out, you send us a deactivation email. We now know it's been freed, the license, and then you activate it on a different computer so that we are able to give you another activation. So that's the new SUPERText Activation Manager. First version is 7.04, and I think you'll find the documentation fairly clear on it. And that is it. Now, today's webinar was on purpose done in listen-only mode, because we've got a fairly large group with different interests and different needs. If your particular group has any specific questions, we're happy to schedule an interactive webinar with you where we'll be able to speak back and forth while we're working on a screen. So please contact us if that's what you wish to do. So merci beaucoup, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. And have a wonderful day and a wonderful long weekend if you celebrate the long weekend, which hopefully you all do. Au revoir.